Thousands of heavy-armored zombies knelt in unison under the moonlight. Caleb casually kicked his nemesis's head into a lava block, then turned to pull a smoke-stained Riley into his arms. He looked down with a roguelike smirk. "Sweetheart, I swore this damn apocalypse wouldn't even have the right to step into our front yard." Welcome to Apex System, an exciting story is about to begin. The excruciating pain of his spine being violently torn apart still pulsed frantically through his nerve endings. The sensation of flesh being ripped from bone was hauntingly real. I snapped my eyes open, gasping for air like a drowning victim just hauled out of deep water. Cold sweat instantly soaked my gray cotton t-shirt, and my heart thundered inside my chest like an out-of-control V8 engine. "Caleb, run!" Riley's piercing scream seemed to still echo in my ears, accompanied by the bone-chilling sound of flesh being gnawed. The nightmare-like final images of my past life lingered in my mind, the black tide sweeping across the entire American continent, and once prosperous cities turned into slaughterhouses for mutated monsters. And that bastard I once considered an ally, Silas Blackwood, had actually embraced the infection to gain dark power, transforming into a high and mighty dark commander. He stepped on my chest, sneering as he watched those monsters tear Riley to pieces after she stayed behind to cover my escape. I subconsciously clenched my fists, my nails digging deep into my flesh. The stinging pain from my palms instantly pulled me back to reality. Wait, shouldn't I be dead? I froze, my gaze quickly scanning the surroundings. The familiar worn-out leather sofa, empty beer bottles strewn across the floor, and a vintage Dallas Cowboys poster still hanging on the wall. This was my apartment, that shithole converted from a broken garage in the suburbs of Texas. I lunged toward the table and grabbed the smartphone with a cracked corner. The screen lit up, and the piercing digits met my eyes. October 15th, 2 p.m. sharp. "My God!" I whispered in disbelief, my legs suddenly giving way as I collapsed onto the worn leather sofa. If my memory served me right, at 5 o'clock this afternoon, the terrifying meteor shower later known as the Black Tide would descend. A black mist carrying a lethal alien virus would instantly sweep across the globe, and humans infected by it would mutate into bloodthirsty monsters within a very short time. I, Caleb Ryder, had miraculously been reborn 3 hours before the outbreak of the apocalypse. "Silas, you son of a bitch!" I gritted my teeth, a low, cold sneer escaping my throat as my eyes burned with an uncontrollable fury and the fires of vengeance. In my previous life, I lost all defensive initiative and was forced to flee like a stray dog with Riley, only to die a miserable death at that bastard's feet. But this time, since heaven has given me a second chance, I'm going to let these monsters know exactly who the true forefather of this wasteland is. Just as I was frantically mapping out my next course of action in my mind, a cold, mechanical voice suddenly exploded directly inside my skull. "Strong survival will detect it from the host. Genesis Cube System beginning binding process. 10%. 50%. 100%. Binding successful. System activation complete. Initial permissions unlocked, matter decomposition and block storage. Warning, 2 hours and 57 minutes remaining until the full outbreak of the Black Tide. Host, please prepare for survival as soon as possible." The sudden voice left my eardrums ringing, but immediately after, a faint blue holographic panel that only I could see popped up before my retinas. The panel displayed an inventory similar to those found in games, with over 100 empty slots. Genesis block system? What kind of hellish cheat code is this? I raised an eyebrow, suppressing the shock in my heart as I tentatively reached out toward the heavy solid wood coffee table in front of me. Following the instinctive instructions flooding my mind from the system, I silently recited the word, decompose, in my head. Whoosh! An incredible scene unfolded. The solid wood coffee table, weighing dozens of pounds, instantly disintegrated amidst a faint blue light, transforming into standard cubic wooden blocks. Then, within half a second, they vanished into thin air, appearing directly in the system inventory displayed on my retina. The first slot of the inventory clearly showed, oak wood block X6. I gasped sharply. No weight limit, instantaneous disassembly and reassembly. This meant I could scavenge massive amounts of supplies in an incredibly short time, and even construct enormous defensive fortifications in an instant in the future. With this thing, Silas, the Dark Army, they're all nothing in the face of my absolute infrastructure and firepower. Time is running out, I have to hurry. I slapped my cheeks hard to force myself to calm down completely. Now was not the time to marvel at this damn stroke of luck. In less than 3 hours, the entire state of Texas would turn into a living hell. Riley was still on duty at Hopkins Hospital downtown. Once the infection broke out there, it would be a death trap of the highest order. I had to gear up and fight my way there to get her out before everything became irreversible. I kicked open the bedroom door and rushed toward the heavy safe my old man had left in the corner. I quickly spun the combination dial, and with a click, I yanked the heavy iron door open. Inside lay all of my belongings, resting quietly. Without hesitation, I pressed my hand against them. The system's blue light flashed repeatedly. One Remington 870 pump-action shotgun, stored into the system. 200 rounds of 12-gauge 00 buckshot, stored into the system. A heavy-duty chainsaw once used for felling redwoods, along with 3 large canisters of mixed gasoline, all stored into the system. Looking at the safe that had instantly become empty, I grinned with satisfaction. This feeling of being able to carry a small arsenal without any added weight was so exhilarating it made my scalp tingle. I quickly changed into a rugged tactical cut-resistant suit, pulled on my off-road military boots, grabbed my car keys, and rushed out of the apartment. The garage door rose slowly, and my black Ford F-150 Raptor, with its modified chassis and reinforced steel bull bars, sat silently in the shadows, looking like a steel beast poised to strike. I pulled open the door, hopped into the driver's seat, and gave the key a sharp, forceful turn in the ignition. Vroom! The high-horsepower engine let out a deafening roar, and a blast of scorching exhaust erupted from the tailpipe. I looked up, staring through the windshield at the horizon. The once clear afternoon sky was already beginning to show a faint, unsettling tinge of sickly purple on the horizon. It was the precursor to the impending arrival of the black tide. The countdown has begun. I gripped the steering wheel with one hand and slammed my foot down on the accelerator. The black pickup truck shot out of the garage like an arrow from a bow, its tires screeching against the asphalt and kicking up a cloud of dust as it hurtled toward the peril-filled city center. I floored the gas pedal of the Ford F-150, the speedometer needle frantically approaching 120 miles per hour. The wilderness flanking Texas State Highway 99 blurred past in a rapid streak. 3:15 p.m. Less than 2 hours remained until the full-scale outbreak of the black tide, as predicted by the system warning. Just as I was preparing to cut into the city via the upcoming exit, the sky darkened without warning. I jerked my head up to see the sickly purplish-red streak across the horizon suddenly tear open like a lacerated wound. Several meteorite fragments, shrouded in thick black mist, came screaming down toward the ground. Damn it, the precursors are arriving even earlier than in my past life! I cursed. Boom! A black meteorite the size of a bowling ball struck the intersection 300 yards ahead with pinpoint accuracy. The massive shockwave flipped a heavy truck loaded with logs. The piercing screech of brakes and the sound of tearing metal instantly merged into one as more than a dozen cars piled up, completely gridlocking the main artery leading into the city. I yanked the steering wheel hard, and the pickup truck, tires screeching, veered into an abandoned farm clearing by the roadside, coming to a jarring halt. Before I could even catch my breath, the scene outside the windshield sent my nerves into a state of high tension. At the intersection, the survivors who had been wailing in agony from the car crash began to twitch violently the moment they inhaled the black mist emanating from the meteorite. In less than 10 seconds, they stood back up in an utterly distorted manner. The whites of their eyes had turned a solid grayish-black, their mouths were torn at the corners, and they lunged like madmen at the living people nearby who were still crying out for help. The first wave of the infection had broken out. Roar! 2 mutants wearing plaid shirts noticed my pickup truck. They shook off their blood-stained hands and sprinted toward me like rabid dogs on stimulants. That speed was definitely beyond human capability. Perfect timing. I was just looking for a place to vent my frustration, I sneered. With a flick of my left hand, a Remington 870 shotgun appeared out of thin air. I kicked the car door open and, as I jumped out, smoothly racked the friend with one hand. With a crisp clack-clack of the action, a 12-gauge buckshot shell was chambered. I raised the muzzle, aimed at the head of the leading bald zombie, and decisively pulled the trigger. Bang! The massive recoil slammed into my shoulder, and amidst the deafening gunshot, that ugly head burst apart like a overripe watermelon. The headless corpse tumbled forward from inertia, sliding a long way across the muddy ground. Just as I was preparing to take out the second one, a piercing red system light suddenly flashed in my mind. Ding! Low-level dark matter infection detected. Biological command module has been unlocked. System prompt. The host may consume a small amount of mental power to utilize the laws of blocks to rewrite the underlying logic of low-level infected entities, converting them into absolutely loyal, laborer servants. I froze for half a second, and then a fanatical light erupted in my eyes. You can even play it like this? Seeing the second female zombie, her face covered in blood, already lunging in front of me, her foul-smelling maw gaping wide to bite my neck, I didn't fire. Instead, I slammed my shotgun down, sidestepped her lunge, and reached out to grab the back of her neck in a death grip, slamming her violently onto the hood of the pickup truck. "Quiet the hell down!" I roared, chanting inwardly, "Convert." In an instant, I felt a surge of icy energy flow from my palm into the zombie's body. On the system panel, the blue progress bar representing mental power dropped slightly. The zombie I was holding down abruptly stopped struggling, and the roar in its throat came to a sudden halt. The grayish-black hue in its eyes faded, replaced by two faint, eerie blue glows. I released my grip and took a step back. Like a robot with its power cut, it turned around stiffly, dropped its arms, and stood obediently before me, motionless. "Holy shit, it's a goddamn miracle!" I couldn't help but swear. I turned my head toward the highway in the distance, where at least 30 newly mutated zombies were still wandering aimlessly. In the apocalypse, the rarest resource is labor that never tires and fears no infection. Since the road to the city was blocked by a pile-up, I had to secure an absolutely safe retreat for myself and Riley. "This is the spot." I snapped my fingers, grabbed a crowbar from the back of the pickup truck, and strode toward the highway. The next 10 minutes became my one-man conversion show. I was like a manic cowboy tagging cattle on a Texas ranch. Any zombie blind enough to lunge at me was pinned to the ground and forcibly injected with a mental brand. When I encountered a few highly mutated ones that resisted fiercely, I simply shattered their knees with the crowbar before proceeding with the conversion. Soon, 35 zombies with glowing blue eyes lined up in perfect formation in front of the abandoned farm, a scene both eerie and spectacular. "Listen up, you ugly pieces of trash!" I stood atop the pickup truck, pointing at the clearing in the center of the farm, and issued a direct command to their brains via the system. "Start from here and dig down! The deeper the better, the larger the space the better." The moment they received the order, this group of zombie laborers acted like clockwork machines, lunging frantically toward the designated clearing. Their mutated strength, far exceeding that of an ordinary human, turned their fingers into the most lethal digging tools. What was even better was that, with the enhancement of my system, the soil they dug up didn't pile into mountains. Instead, the moment it left the ground, it transformed into dirt blocks and stone blocks, flying continuously into my system inventory. This is straight-up cheating-level infrastructure mania. Dirt flies everywhere as the ground collapses at a speed visible to the naked eye. In less than 20 minutes, the prototype of an underground shelter, 10 meters deep and half the size of a football field, is forcibly hollowed out. The four walls are cut as smooth as a blade's edge by the laws of the system. I pull out the oak wood blocks I scavenged earlier from the system space and give a simple mental command. Dozens of wooden blocks automatically piece themselves together in midair, transforming into sturdy load-bearing pillars and a ceiling that firmly support the underground space. This is my very first outpost. I drove the pickup into the concealed underground entrance, a satisfied sneer curling my lips as I watched this group of tireless laborers. "Good job, boys. Now stand by." I turned and pulled a brand new AR-15 assault rifle from the system, stuffing several fully loaded magazines into my tactical vest. Toward the distant city center, billowing plumes of thick smoke had already surged into the sky, and the faint, muffled sounds of explosions echoed in the air. Time is running out. I must trek through that blocked highway and fight my way into the hellish downtown area. "Riley, wait for me. This time, even if death himself comes to claim you, I'll tear a layer of skin off his back." Just as I reached that great wall of mangled scrap metal from the multi-car pileup, hearing the blood-curdling screams echoing from deep within the city, I immediately changed my mind. Trekking through these obstacles and then running to the city center would be far too slow. Riley might not hold out much longer. I slapped my forehead, cursing my momentary lapse in judgment for forgetting the system's most dominant feature. I dashed forward, slamming both hands directly onto the side of a burning semi-truck trailer. Gritting my teeth, I growled, "System, decompose this entire row of scrap metal blocking my way!" Shwa! A blinding, eerie blue light swept across the traffic jam like an invisible blade. An incredible sight unfolded. Over a dozen mangled, scrap cars disintegrated in an instant, with the flames and thick smoke vanishing right along with them. In their place, the count of scrap metal blocks in my system inventory surged by over 1,000, alongside several hundred glass blocks. The once congested highway had been forcibly carved into a straight, wide boulevard. "Now that's more like it!" I let out a whistle, turned, and sprinted back to the underground shelter, jumping back onto that Ford Raptor pickup. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, and the high-horsepower engine erupted in a violent roar. The heavy pickup, like a steel beast breaking its chains, plunged headlong down the cleared highway into the heart of the city as it completely collapsed. The scene in the city was nothing short of a rated R, low-budget Hollywood apocalypse flick. Overturned cars and soaring flames were everywhere. A thick, virus-laden black mist drifted through the streets, and infected citizens with ashen eyes roamed in packs like rabid dogs, lunging at and tearing into the screaming survivors who were fleeing in terror. Get lost. I gripped the steering wheel tight, with no intention of slowing down. The steel bull bar at the front of the pickup let out a dull thud as it slammed into 5 or 6 mutants trying to block the way, instantly turning them into a spray of flying flesh and bone. The wipers swung frantically, clearing the thick, black blood from the windshield as I forced a path through the horde. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, I finally caught sight of the Hopkins Hospital building. The glass doors of the ER entrance were completely shattered, and the lobby was a scene of total carnage, littered with severed limbs. I slammed on the brakes, skidding the pickup to a halt next to the fountain below the steps. I grabbed the AR-15 off the passenger seat, slung the Remington shotgun over my back, kicked the door open, and charged straight inside. Riley! I roared, my voice echoing through the vast, blood-soaked lobby. The lights in the corridor flickered intermittently as 3 mutated doctors in white coats turned their heads at the sound. Their jaws were dislocated, hanging with nauseating shreds of flesh, as they let out guttural roars and lunged toward me. Doctors, your licenses have been revoked. I raised my rifle expressionlessly, and decisively pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 The assault rifle spat out lethal tongues of fire, and the 5.56mm rounds blew off their skulls with pinpoint precision. Stepping through the thick, viscous blood on the floor, I strode over the corpses and fought my way toward the pharmacy deep within the emergency room. In my past life, that was where Riley had sent me her final distress signal. Just as I turned the corner, my heart suddenly tightened. Outside the pharmacy's sturdy security door, at least a dozen powerful mutants were piled on top of one another, frantically ramming against the entrance. The heavy iron door was severely deformed, its hinges emitting an overburdened screech, looking as if it were about to give way at any moment. Through the reinforced glass mesh of the door, I saw the figure that had haunted my dreams. Riley, with her blonde hair and blood-stained blue scrubs, stood behind the door trembling, gripping a fire axe with a deathly tight hold. Her eyes betrayed despair, but more than that, a fierce determination to take them down with her. That was my girl, the fool who, in my past life, dared to charge into the horde alone just to cover my escape. Seeing this scene, the fury in my mind exploded with a boom, as the self-reproach of my past life and the volatility of my current one merged perfectly in that instant. Get away from my girl, you faceless pieces of shit! I tossed aside the rifle with its empty magazine and reached back to draw the Remington shotgun. A coarse clack of the slide chambering around echoed through the corridor. Boom! 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 I strode forward with long, purposeful steps, and with every pull of the trigger, the 12-gauge buckshot tore through the flesh ahead like a storm. The mutants on the outermost edge were blasted clean in two by the massive kinetic energy, their severed limbs and black blood splattering across the walls. The roar of the gunfire and the death rattles of the monsters were deafening. In a matter of seconds, nothing remained at the pharmacy entrance but a pile of stinking, mangled meat. I stepped over the carpet of wreckage to the entrance and delivered a heavy kick to the warped security door, forcing it open. Inside, Riley raised a fire axe, ready to strike, but she froze instantly upon seeing my face. The axe hit the floor with a loud clang, and her eyes welled up with tears in an instant. Caleb? Oh my God, what are you doing here? It's pure madness outside, there are man-eating monsters everywhere. Her voice trembled, incoherent, as tears welled up in her eyes. I told you, even if it were the end of the world, I'd come to pick you up from work, sweetheart. I strode forward, pulling her into my arms and holding her tight. Feeling her rapid breathing and the genuine warmth of her body, the suffocating weight that had crushed my chest in my past life finally dissipated completely. I did it. This time, she is alive in my arms. But I knew now was not the time for sentimentality. The sirens outside were growing more piercing, and the dark tide engulfing the entire city was escalating rapidly. Grab your axe and stay close to me. I let go of her, picked up the rifle from the ground, and quickly swapped in a fresh magazine, my gaze turning razor-sharp. We need to get out of this hellhole. At the end of the corridor, more mutants had heard the gunfire and were surging forward like a rising tide. These guys sure are welcoming, I sneered. Gripping Riley's hand tightly with my left, I fired the rifle one-handed with my right, covering her as we charged out of the building. We leaped onto the pickup truck. I slammed it into reverse and floored the accelerator. The heavy truck brutally sent several monsters clinging to the doors flying. We tore through the rolling black tide, leaving that living hell far behind us. The Ford Raptor pickup truck sped down Highway 99, kicking up billowing clouds of dust in its wake. The once familiar Texas plains were now shrouded in a desperate silence and chaos. 4:50 p.m. The sky had turned completely pitch black, a darkness purer than a starless night. In the distance, city buildings struggled to survive amid soaring flames, while air raid sirens wailed across the entire interstate, sounding as shrill and mournful as a death knell for human civilization. Caleb, what on earth is happening? This definitely isn't some biochemical leak, even the sky has changed. Riley, sitting in the passenger seat, gripped her seatbelt tightly. Her face was pale, but her eyes had gradually calmed from their initial terror. She was a smart girl, the top emergency surgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital, with a psychological resilience far beyond that of an ordinary person. This is the black tide, a viral meteor shower from outer space. At 5 o'clock sharp, the true disaster will erupt in full force. I jerked the steering wheel, and the pickup truck veered precisely into a hidden, abandoned dirt road. Don't be afraid, I have a plan. We're going to the safest place in the world. At 4:55 p.m., the pickup plunged into the entrance of the underground shelter that I had forced my zombie laborers to dig out just a few hours ago. The moment the wheels rolled over the basement's load-bearing beams, a violent tremor shook the ground. Rumble! A dull, thunderous roar echoed from above, as if tens of thousands of tons of explosives had detonated simultaneously within the clouds. I slammed on the brakes and looked up at the sky through the rearview mirror. Countless massive black meteors, trailing streaks of purple, were hurtling toward the ground like a torrential downpour. The earth trembled, and soil showered down from overhead. The true black tide had arrived. My God! Riley gasped, covering her mouth as her entire body shook. If we had stayed outside for even 5 more minutes, we would have been torn to shreds by this meteor shower and the high-concentration black mist following in its wake. We're safe. I pulled the key from the ignition and pushed the car door open. Riley followed, jumping out of the vehicle, but as soon as she saw what lay within the underground shelter, she let out a sharp scream and instinctively raised the fire axe, which was still stained with black blood. Illuminated by the pickup truck's headlights, 35 blue-eyed zombies stood in perfect formation at the edge of the clearing, looking like a bizarre, silent army. Don't be nervous, put the axe down. They're on our side now. I reached out to press down on the handle of Riley's axe, shielding her behind me. On our side? Caleb, have you lost your mind? These are monsters! Riley's eyes widened in disbelief. To be precise, they are now my unpaid construction workers. I snapped my fingers. Following the command in my mind, the 35 zombies turned in unison and marched toward the rock wall deep within the sanctuary, beginning to dig frantically with their mutated, iron-hard claws. An incredible scene unfolded before Riley's eyes. The soil and hard rock excavated by the zombies did not pile up. Instead, they vanished into thin air the moment they left the ground. Riley gasped, the axe in her hand nearly slipping to the ground. This? How is this possible? What exactly did you do? It's hard to explain in a few words. You can think of it as me awakening a superpower that can decompose and restructure matter. I patted her shoulder and gave her a reassuring smile. Go rest in the car for a bit, and while you're at it, help me take inventory of the canned food in the back seat. Next, I'm going to build us a real fortress. After settling Riley in, I walked to the center of the underground space and pulled up the system panel on my retina. In the inventory, over 1,000 scrap metal blocks, obtained from dismantling the highway wreckage, along with more than 3,000 stone blocks and dirt blocks, freshly excavated by the zombie laborers, lay quietly in their slots. System, begin modular construction. I took a deep breath, my mental focus sharpening to a point, and abruptly thrust my hands upward into the void. Shwa! An extremely dazzling net of ghostly blue light spread rapidly from beneath my feet, instantly covering the entire underground space and extending upward to the surface. Foundation first. With a single thought, the 1,000 stone blocks in my inventory were manipulated as if by an invisible giant hand, turning into streaks of flowing light that surged toward the surrounding walls and floor. Amidst a series of grating mechanical clicks, the originally rough earthen walls were instantly covered by a layer of solid stone a meter thick. Without any cement or mortar, the laws of the system forced these 1 cubic meter blocks to fit together seamlessly, defying all common principles of structural mechanics yet remaining indestructible. Outer defenses, rise! I immediately locked onto those thousands of scrap iron blocks. A faint blue light pierced through the ground, surging wildly across the flat clearing above the abandoned farm. Heavy blocks of pure iron materialized out of thin air, stacking upward rapidly like building blocks. 5 meters. 8 meters. 10 meters. A pitch-black steel fortress, 20 meters long and wide and 10 meters high, rose from the ground in a mere 10-odd minutes in an extremely violent and anti-physical manner. The steel outer walls were 2 meters thick, with no welding seams on the surface, so smooth that even a fly couldn't find a foothold. I reserved firing ports at the 4 corners of the steel fortress and fused glass blocks with scrap iron to generate a mechanical lifting iron gate weighing several tons directly in front of the first-floor hall. Meanwhile, the zombie laborers underground worked like tireless perpetual motion machines, digging downward frantically and providing me with a steady stream of new stone resources. I immediately funneled these new materials into refining the internal structure, reinforced load-bearing pillars, partitioned rest areas, supply storage rooms, and even a designated armory for heavy weaponry. Throughout the better part of the night, the only sounds in the underground space were the rustling of zombie excavation and the dull thuds of blocks snapping together. It continued until the first glimmer of dawn attempted to pierce through the thick fog outside. I let out a long sigh of relief, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and closed the system panel. My head throbbed slightly from the excessive drain on my mental energy, but looking at everything before me, I felt nothing but pure ecstasy. The original dilapidated farm had completely vanished, replaced by a cubic fortress forged entirely in pitch-black steel, looking like a colossal iron beast. It stood like a spike driven deep into the Texas wilderness, coldly overlooking a world that had descended into a living hell. "Caleb." Riley had approached me at some point. She looked up at this grand miracle that had risen from the ground overnight, too stunned to utter a complete sentence. Faintly, several dull thuds echoed through the thick steel exterior walls. It was the sound of the roaming hordes outside catching the scent of the living, futilely clawing at the indestructible iron barrier. "Listen, Riley." I walked to the wall and patted the cold iron with a sneer. "No matter how much the world outside rots, as long as we are inside this fortress, I am the only rule." At 7 in the morning, the heavy steel fortress was so quiet that only the faint hum of the ventilation system could be heard. I stood before the surveillance screens on the second floor, holding a cup of instant coffee that Riley had just brewed on the portable stove. The screens were connected to several high-definition cameras I had covertly installed on the fortress's outer walls last night. In the current footage, at least 1,000 mutants had already swarmed around the perimeter. The massive commotion of the steel fortress rising from the ground last night, combined with the scent of living humans from Riley and me, acted like a super searchlight in the dark, drawing in every monster within a several-mile radius. They clawed frantically at the smooth iron walls with talons stained in black blood, producing a grating, teeth-clenching screech. Just then, a crisp electronic chime suddenly rang out in my mind. "Ding! It has been detected that the basic steel fortress is completed and operating stably. Preconditions met. System prompt, the Armory Store module, has been officially unlocked. The host may exchange basic resource blocks mined by subordinates, or dark matter cores obtained by killing infected entities, for various types of modern military equipment and ammunition." I raised an eyebrow and immediately set down my coffee cup. With a single thought, a translucent blue panel that only I could see unfolded before my eyes. The store interface was simple and direct, with a dazzling array of weapon icons emitting a cold, metallic luster. Everything was there, from Glock pistols to M4 carbines, to various models of grenades and tactical body armor. But what truly made my heart race was the balance displayed at the very top of the interface. After 35 zombie laborers spent an entire night of tireless, frantic downward digging, my system space had accumulated a full 100,000 stone blocks and 20,000 iron ore blocks. Under the system's conversion mechanism, this massive hoard of resources was directly transformed into a staggering 300,000 armament points. "Talk about perfect timing," I sneered, my gaze skipping right past the small arms and locking onto the heavy weaponry category. Against a zombie horde of that scale, rifles would be next to useless. What I needed was absolute firepower capable of tearing everything to shreds. System: exchange for 4 M2 heavy machine guns, plus 40,000 rounds of .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. Throw in 10 cases of M67 fragmentation grenades as well. Ding! 50,000 armament points deducted. Exchange successful. Supplies have been delivered to the system space. I turned and strode down the stairs, arriving at the first-floor lobby. Riley was sitting on a supply crate cleaning her fire axe. Seeing me come down, she looked up with a hint of inquiry in her eyes. "How's the situation outside?" she asked. "It's time for breakfast." I winked at her, then walked to the center of the lobby and gave a grand wave of my hand. Thud. 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 4 massive dark green military wooden crates slammed onto the concrete floor out of thin air, kicking up a cloud of dust. They were followed by a mountain of ammunition boxes. Riley jumped in shock, snapping to her feet and staring wide-eyed at the heavy equipment, which reeked of gun oil. "You You can even conjure these up? Riley swallowed hard. A little perk from the system upgrade. I didn't offer much explanation, walking straight to the basement entrance and issuing a command through the system. Number 1 through number 4, get up here! In less than 10 seconds, 4 of the most burly zombie coolies, still stained with fresh soil, stiffly crawled up from the basement. The eerie blue glow in their eye sockets appeared exceptionally haunting in the dim hall. I stepped forward, pried open the wooden crate with my bare hands, and lifted out an M2 heavy machine gun weighing 38 kilograms. With the tripod included, this thing would be a struggle for an ordinary person to move, but in the hands of the zombie coolies, it was as light as nothing. Listen, I said, staring into the eyes of the 4 coolies as I forcibly injected the underlying logic commands of basic firearm shooting into their brains. Mount these big guys at the firing ports in the 4 corners. You don't need to aim precisely. As long as any living creature without a blue spiritual mark appears in your field of vision, hold the trigger down until the barrels turn red. The 4 zombie coolies let out a low growl, mechanically picked up the heavy machine guns and crates of ammunition belts, and strode toward the firing positions at the 4 corners of the fortress. After poking the barrels through the heavy firing ports, they completed the chambering process with stiff yet incredibly precise movements. The golden ammunition belts hung from the gun bodies like metallic waterfalls. Zombies operating heavy machine guns. If this scene were filmed, it would be torn apart by critics, but in this apocalypse warped by system laws, they were the perfect war machines. They knew no fatigue, feared no deafening gunfire, and would never suffer from muscle strain or psychological dread due to recoil. Riley, cover your ears! I shouted to her, then pressed the switch for the outer shutters of the firing ports on the wall. Accompanied by the harsh screech of metal friction, the armored plates of the 4 firing ports slowly rose. The horde of zombies outside instantly rioted, surging frantically toward the firing slits. Fire! I issued the absolute command in my mind. Boom! 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 4 M2 heavy machine guns roared simultaneously, shaking the very earth. .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds spat out frantically at a rate of hundreds of rounds per minute. Massive muzzle flashes, half a meter long, flared through the thick morning mist like the swinging scythe of the Grim Reaper. It was a one-sided slaughter with no suspense. Heavy machine gun bullets, carrying terrifying kinetic energy, tore through the mutants at the front as easily as shredding paper. Even those highly muscular mutant monsters were as fragile as a joke in the face of .50 caliber rounds. After shattering the chest cavity of the first zombie, the bullet's momentum remained undiminished, continuing to pierce through the bodies of 3 or 4 zombies behind them before finally triggering violent explosions within the dense horde. Severed limbs danced wildly in the air, and black blood soaked the muddy ground surrounding the fortress like a fountain. In just 3 minutes, the crossfire network formed by 40,000 rounds of ammunition forcibly turned the area within 50 meters of the fortress into an absolute death meat grinder. There were no screams, only the muffled thuds of flesh being torn by metal and the heavy sound of bodies hitting the ground. My God! Riley muttered, her face pale as she stared at the carnage outside through the bulletproof observation window on the first floor. However, her tightly clenched fists betrayed the intense exhilaration surging deep within her. I walked over to her side, looking out at the mountains of corpses piled up outside. As the pungent smell of gunpowder drifted in through the vents, a cold, ruthless arc curled at the corner of my mouth. Inside this fortress, as long as I have enough ammunition, even the demons of hell would be ground into a pulp if they dared to show their faces. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the roars and shrieks surrounding the fortress finally fell completely silent. Monitoring the screen, I watched the mountain of mutant remains piled up outside as the system's cold notification tones rang incessantly in my mind. The meat grinder slaughter from last night through this morning had not only proven the invulnerability of this steel fortress, but had also brought me an incredibly rich harvest. The dark energy contained within the zombies was automatically extracted by the system upon their death, transforming into exactly 8,000 lesser dark matter crystals, now lying quietly in my inventory. Just as I was preparing to have the zombie laborers in the basement come up to clear the battlefield, a piercing red alarm suddenly flashed on the edge of the main control screen. High threat target detected approaching at high speed. I immediately switched to the high-altitude overhead camera facing southeast. Piercing through the pervasive black mist, 3 heavy-duty off-road vehicles welded with crude, jagged anti-collision steel spikes were racing along the abandoned dirt road. And running ahead of these vehicles were, incredibly, over a dozen mutant hounds as large as calves. Instead of attacking the convoy, they seemed to be clearing the way for the off-road vehicles. As the camera zoomed in, revealing the man leaning halfway out of the lead vehicle's passenger seat, my fingers tightened around my coffee cup. My knuckles turned white, and the cup let out a strained, brittle crack. It was a burly man with a shaved head and a black patch over his left eye. He held a pair of military binoculars, greedily surveying my steel fortress. Silas. Even if he were turned to ash, I would never mistake that face. In my past life, this thug, a former Blackwater mercenary who had defected, had used his ruthless methods to recruit a large band of outlaws early in the apocalypse. He had even managed to obtain a high-level crystal core, awakening an ability to briefly control low-level mutated creatures. In the third year of the previous apocalypse, it was he who led the so-called Dark Vanguard to breach my first crude shelter using human wave tactics. They looted all our supplies, forcing Riley and me to wander in the freezing snow for 2 grueling weeks. "Who is that?" Riley walked over, her brow furrowing as she saw the images on the screen. "They have rocket launchers, and those mutant dogs are actually following their commands. A bunch of scumbags who belong in hell." I tossed the deformed coffee cup into the trash, my gaze cold and devoid of any warmth. "It seems the noise we made last night was too loud. Not only did it attract brainless zombies, but it also drew in the greediest wild dogs in this area." On the screen, Silas's convoy came to a halt 500 meters from the fortress. He clearly didn't view this as a private stronghold, but rather mistook it for some kind of secret military outpost that hadn't had time to evacuate. Several heavily armed thugs jumped out of the vehicles and set up an old but powerful TOW anti-tank missile launcher directly on a roof, its dark muzzle pointing straight at my mechanical lift gate. They intended to blow the gate wide open and plunder everything inside. A standard M2 heavy machine gun has no trouble tearing through flesh and blood, but relying on the stiff aiming movements of zombie laborers to precisely intercept a high-speed anti-tank missile from 500 meters away was simply unrealistic. "You want to break down my door? You'll have to pay with your life," I sneered, immediately summoning the system panel. Without hesitation, I poured the 8,000 junior dark matter crystals I had just harvested, along with all the remaining iron ore blocks and scrap iron blocks in my inventory, into the advanced blueprint synthesis module. "System, unlock and construct 2 Hummingbird-class CIWS automated defense towers." Ding! Deducting 6,000 crystals and 20,000 iron blocks. Advanced blueprint activated. Accompanied by the mechanical voice of the system, a violent sound of metal restructuring suddenly erupted from the flat steel roof of the fortress. 2 originally flush armor plates slid to either side, and immediately following, 2 heavy turrets, exuding a sense of violent aesthetics and sci-fi texture, slowly rose into view. They were pitch black, with red optical induction radars flickering on their bases, while their front ends featured chilling 6-barrel rotary cannons. Without any manual intervention, the moment the 2 defense towers rose, their infrared locking lasers pinned onto Silas's convoy 500 meters away like the swords of the Grim Reaper. On the screen, Silas had clearly seen the changes atop the fortress as well. His expression shifted drastically as he pounded frantically on the roof of the vehicle, roaring orders to open fire. Swoosh! The anti-tank missile streaked toward the fortress gate, trailing a long plume of exhaust and emitting a piercing shriek. The moment the missile had traveled less than 200 meters, the automated defense towers atop the fortress sprang into action. VRRR! This was no ordinary gunfire, but the terrifying tearing sound of bullets forming a solid line in the air at a rate of 6,000 rounds per minute. 2 thick whips of fire lashed out across the sky, intercepting the missile with pinpoint accuracy. Boom! A violent explosion blossomed in midair, the shockwave even scattering the surrounding black mist. However, the defense tower's performance had only just begun. After intercepting the missiles, the cold mechanical muzzles tilted slightly downward, and red locking beams directly enveloped the convoy and the pack of mutant hounds on the ground. In the next second, a metal storm poured down mercilessly. Silas's Dark Vanguard didn't even have time to scream. High-explosive armor-piercing rounds instantly shredded those massive mutant hounds into a mist of blood flying through the air. Immediately after, the 3 armored off-road vehicles, covered in welded plates, were torn to pieces like paper toys by the dense hail of bullets, their fuel tanks detonating in a towering fireball. "Retreat! Retreat now!" Silas's terror-stricken screams even reached the fortress, carried by the wind. He was absurdly lucky. The moment the missiles were intercepted, he had decisively leaped from his vehicle, scrambling into a dried-up brush-filled gully. Ignoring the fate of his subordinates, he fled toward the distance like a literal stray dog. After losing its infrared heat signatures, the defense tower slowly ceased its rotation. Its barrels, emitting glowing white smoke, returned to their alert state. "He's getting away," Riley said, letting out a long sigh of relief as she watched the disheveled black speck fleeing across the screen. "It doesn't matter, let him run," I said, staring at the screen with a cruel curve to my lips. he'll take the news of an invincible fortress back to his base. Next time, he'll bring more men and more crystal cores to their deaths. And I, for one, was just worrying about not having enough materials to upgrade the fortress. It has been only 3 days since that stray dog, Silas, fled. In those 3 days, the thick mist of the black tide has completely swallowed the Texas skyline, plunging the entire wasteland into a perpetual, midnight gloom. Yet, in this endless darkness, my steel fortress sits like a dormant behemoth, greedily devouring underground resources. 35 zombie laborers have been digging day and night, accumulating over 100,000 basic blocks for me. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the red alarm on the main console shrieked once again. I knew it, greed is the most lethal poison to humanity. Holding a glass of warm water, I watched the dense cluster of red dots on the large screen, a cold sneer tugging at the corner of my mouth. On the surveillance monitors, a massive convoy of over 50 heavily modified pickup trucks and armored trucks was encircling the fortress like a black viper. More than 300 fully armed thugs leaped from the vehicles, equipped not only with heavy machine guns and rocket launchers but even dragging 2 vintage vehicle-mounted mortars. This was Silas's Dark Legion, and he had clearly mobilized his entire force, intending to level this place with absolute firepower. Caleb, there are at least 300 people out there, and they have mortars. Do our point defense towers have enough ammunition? Riley stood beside me, watching the dense crowd on the screen, her palms slick with cold sweat. Point defense towers are great for high-value single targets, but against scattered mortar positions like these, their ammo can be easily depleted. I set down my water glass, a bloodthirsty glint flashing in my eyes. So, this time, I don't plan on just hiding in my shell. Defense is safe, but if you want to establish absolute rules in this wasteland, you have to slaughter them until they are paralyzed with fear. I pulled up the system panel and looked at the more than 20,000 dark matter cores accumulated over the past 3 days, pouring every single one of them into the barracks system without hesitation. System, perform a comprehensive armament upgrade for these 35 zombie laborers. Ding! 15,000 crystal nuclei deducted. 35 sets of heavy anti-riot armor and exoskeleton power assist modules have been equipped. Ding! 5,000 crystal nuclei deducted. Equipped with 35 Gatling 6-barrel machine guns and 20,000 rounds of large-caliber armor-piercing ammunition, along with Super Ally tactical long knives. The ear-piercing sound of metal clashing and assembling immediately echoed through the basement. I turned to look at Riley and said in a calm tone, "Stay in the control room and manage the point defense towers to provide fire cover for me. Today, I'm going to show those pieces of trash outside what a real hell looks like." Under Riley's shocked gaze, I threw on a black tactical trench coat and walked straight toward the first-floor lobby. Outside the gate, Silas stood atop an armored truck, shouting frantically through a megaphone. "Listen up inside. I know you have automated cannons, but I have 300 brothers and mortars. Hand over control of the fortress, send out all the supplies and women, and I might show some mercy and leave you a whole corpse. Otherwise, I'll level this place to the ground." Responding to him was a dull, mechanical roar. The steel gate, weighing several tons, slowly rose as blinding searchlights burst from inside the fortress, instantly tearing through the black mist outside. Silas froze, and his 300-plus thugs instinctively raised their guns, staring intently at that slowly opening gate to hell. "Fire! Turn him into mincemeat." Silas thought I was surrendering, but the moment he saw me walking out alone, he immediately barked the kill order with a sinister grin. However, before the gunshots could ring out, the sound of uniform, heavy metallic footsteps, like the beating of war drums, echoed from deep within the gates. Thud! 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 35 terrifying figures, each standing over 2 meters tall, marched out of the fortress with heavy strides. They were encased from head to toe in pitch-black heavy riot armor, with the eerie blue light of death flickering beneath their helmets. Each zombie clutched a Gatling machine gun that gleamed with a cold luster, while 2 super alloy longswords for melee combat were crossed behind their backs. What the hell are these things? Terminators? The sneer on Silas's face froze instantly, his single eye widening in sheer terror. Kill them all. Leave no one alive. I stood on the steel steps, spitting out the command coldly. Boom! 35 Gatling guns began to rotate simultaneously, their deafening roars instantly drowning out the raging winds of the wasteland. Tens of thousands of large-caliber armor-piercing rounds wove into an impenetrable web of death, sweeping toward the Dark Legion's positions with overwhelming force. It was a one-sided massacre with no suspense. Silas's thugs tried to fight back, but they discovered in despair that the rifle bullets in their hands could only kick up clusters of feeble sparks against the heavy armor of these monsters. The Gatling machine guns, whose recoil could shatter a normal person's arm bones, were held as steady as if welded to the ground in the hands of these tireless, immensely powerful mutated zombies. My leg! Monsters! They won't die! The dozens of thugs in the front row were instantly torn to shreds by the metal storm, flesh and blood flying everywhere. Several modified pickup trucks were even blown into the air by the dense hail of bullets. Before the mortar crews could adjust their angles, they were sliced in half, along with their cannon barrels, by several armed zombies that had charged into their positions. This wasn't a battle. It was a slaughterhouse. My zombie legion was like an emotionless meat grinder, rampaging through the enemy's defensive lines. When they ran out of bullets, they drew the superalloy longswords from their backs, slicing through the thugs' throats and chests like harvesting wheat. No fear, no pain, only absolute obedience and slaughter. Retreat! Retreat now! He's a devil! Silas's psychological defenses completely shattered. He screamed in terror, attempting to leap from the truck and flee. Do you really think you can run a second time? Unbeknownst to him, I had already waded through the pools of blood and severed limbs to stand before his truck. 2 armored zombies, drenched in blood, stood beside me like twin guardians, their blood-dripping long blades pointed directly at his throat. The surroundings had fallen silent. In just over 10 minutes, more than 300 members of the Dark Legion had been reduced to a field of shredded flesh and burning wreckage. Silas's legs gave way, and he collapsed heavily onto the mud soaked in black blood. He looked at me, then at the mutated zombie standing as still and imposing as mountains, his single eye filled with nothing but deep despair and disbelief. Who? What on earth are you? How can you possibly control the dead? In this world, the living are often far more lawless than the dead. I drew my pistol, pressing the muzzle against the center of his forehead, my gaze cold. And I am the one here to set the rules. Bang! The gunshot echoed across the deathly silent ruins. I blew away the smoke from the barrel and turned toward the fortress. Behind me, 35 armed zombies began to silently clear the battlefield, gathering new spoils for me. The old era of this wasteland was finally brought to a complete end at this very moment. The shot at the end of the previous chapter did not take Silas's life. In the final millisecond before the Desert Eagle's bullet left the barrel, I deliberately lowered the muzzle. The large-caliber magnum round precisely shattered his right clavicle and scapula. His entire right arm was nearly torn off completely, hanging on by only a few shreds of flesh. He slumped into the mud like a mangy dog with its hamstrings cut, letting out a shrill, agonizing scream like a slaughtered pig. Kill me! You demon, if you have the guts, kill me! Silas writhed frantically in the pool of blood, his single eye filled with extreme terror of the unknown. I ignored his impotent rage and simply gave a casual wave of my hand. 2 fully armed mutant zombies immediately stepped forward. They grabbed him by the back of his collar like a bag of trash and dragged him across the hard concrete, leaving a glaring trail of blood as they headed straight through the heavy gates of the fortress. Inside the interrogation room beneath the fortress, the air was unnaturally scorching, and even the light seemed to warp under the intense heat. In the center of the room, atop a metal restraint platform, hovered a 1 cubic meter block emitting a blinding orange-red glow. This was a magma block. Last night, while the 35 zombie laborers were digging downward to expand the underground bunker, they accidentally breached a deep geothermal layer. The system had automatically liquefied and purified the surging magma, condensing it into this basic block possessed of terrifying thermal energy. It was originally intended to serve as the core energy source for the fortress's internal circulating geothermal generator, but now, it had become a perfect instrument of execution. Silas was thrown heavily in front of the restraint platform. The radiant heat, intense enough to instantly char an ordinary person, caused the remaining left side of his face to twitch violently. He stared at the magma block, where dark red bubbles constantly churned, and his pupils instantly contracted to the size of pinpricks. What? What exactly do you want to do? His voice trembled violently from extreme terror and blood loss, stripped of every bit of the arrogance he had displayed while blustering outside the fortress earlier. In my memory, you've always been a thug who enjoys crushing others under your heel just to admire their despair. I pulled over a metal folding chair and sat down, methodically removing my blood-stained tactical gloves. I just wanted you to experience it for yourself, that feeling of being unable to live, yet unable to die. Although Silas couldn't understand the metaphors regarding my past life, he could clearly feel the biting, tangible killing intent radiating from me. He broke down completely, desperately clutching my boot with his remaining left hand, his face a mess of snot, tears, and dust. Let me go! Please, let me go! I have a secret stronghold in an abandoned chemical plant to the south. there are 100,000 rounds of ammunition and 20,000 cans of military rations. I'll give you everything, all the supplies, the women, the weapons. I'll be your dog. 100,000 rounds? 20,000 cans? I looked down at him coldly, my lips curling into a mocking sneer. Keep them for yourself to enjoy in hell. I stood up abruptly and grabbed the back of his bald head. My system-enhanced body granted me terrifying strength. Silas's 200-plus-pound frame felt as light as a ragdoll in my hands. Gripping him by the neck, I shoved him directly toward the lava block radiating over 1,000 degrees of heat. No! Please, no! A scream of extreme agony echoed through the interrogation room for less than half a second before cutting off abruptly. There was no blood splatter, nor any room for resistance. The moment I pressed Silas's head into the lava block, the horrific temperature instantly carbonized his flesh, bone, and even brain tissue. Accompanied by a skin-crawling sizzle and a pungent stench of burning, his strugglings ceased entirely. I let go, and Silas's headless, mangled corpse slumped onto the cold metal floor like a pile of mud. The nemesis from my past life, the man who had hunted Riley and me through the freezing snow for half a month and nearly driven us to our deaths, had been completely erased from this world, crushed as easily as a common bug. Clean it up, I commanded the zombie guards behind me coldly, before stepping out of the suffocating basement. Back in the top-floor command center, Riley was standing before the main console. She had witnessed the entire execution through the surveillance monitors, but there wasn't a trace of sympathy or pity in her eyes, only the absolute composure of someone who had endured the cruelties of the apocalypse. Is it over? She asked softly, handing me a clean, damp towel. The old troubles are over, but a new era has only just begun. I wiped the scent of gunpowder from my hands, my gaze sweeping across the system panel. The system inventory is complete. The Dark Legion really delivered a massive gift this time. Besides those 50-plus modified vehicles and the mountain of firearms and ammunition outside, they were carrying over 20,000 low-grade dark matter cores. With these resources, we can directly upgrade the fortress's outer armor to a superalloy blast-proof layer. I tossed the towel onto the table and took Riley's hand. Come on, accompany me to the top to see our territory. We took the pneumatic elevator directly to the highest level of the Iron Fortress. As the heavy armored isolation doors slid open to both sides, the biting cold wind of the wasteland instantly rushed toward us, only to be quickly blocked out by the invisible temperature control field at the top of the fortress. We stood side by side on the observation deck, 30 meters above the ground, overlooking the entire land shrouded in black mist. Beneath the fortress, 35 tireless armed zombies were clearing the battlefield like worker ants, transporting cartloads of loot back to the underground warehouse. Under the infrared targeting beams emitted by the two advanced CIWS towers, the black tide mist within a 1-kilometer radius seemed to recoil in fear, daring not to cross the line by even a single step. This steel bastion, rising abruptly from the ground, was like an unyielding nail driven straight into the heart of the darkness. Silas's men have been wiped out. This news will soon spread to every corner through the wasteland scavengers and survivors. Riley leaned against the cold metal railing, letting the gale whip through her long hair, her eyes reflecting the red glow of the fortress's perimeter warning lights. By then, everyone will know about this place. That is exactly what I want. I stepped forward and spread my arms, feeling the slight mechanical vibrations emanating from this invincible fortress I had built with my own hands. At the far edge of the sky, a faint glimmer of dawn was struggling to tear through the thick cloud layers, spilling onto the pitch-black alloy hull of our fortress. From this day forward, this fortress is the only absolute safe zone in this wasteland. Anyone who wishes to survive in this hell must abide by our rules. I turned my head, looking Riley in the eye, my voice firm and filled with an unquestionable dominance. And my rule is this: those who follow me shall live, those who oppose me shall be turned to ash. Upon these ruins where the rule of law has collapsed and monsters roam free, the regulations of the old world have been utterly shattered. Now, a new throne has been forged, and the laws of the wasteland will be rewritten by me. The end. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.